Well, I had so many of them, Well, you know, when I came on the scene, the generals were in place, and I could shuffle the deck, and I did that. I replaced McDowell with McClellan. Now, if you can use a person where his or her strengths are, that's wonderful. McClellan was an engineer. He thought like an engineer. He looked at the fiasco that had just about happened at Bull Run and knew that Washington could have been taken over by the Confederates had they come into town. Maybe it was divine providence that kept that from happening. It didn't happen, and he said, we have to make this city less vulnerable. He said, we've got to build a series of 64 forts around it. That's brilliant. He took that rundown army, they were defeated, they were down on themselves, and he instilled with them a new sense of pride. He got them to marching well, they were looking well, but that's as far as he went. He never wanted to put them in harm's way. He missed many opportunities. And I knew his strength was organization, so I gave him a second chance after the second Battle of Bull Run, which he had nothing to do with, but he rebuilt that army. And then he took it out to a place called Sharpsburg, Maryland. And on the 17th of September in 1862, he defeated Robert E. Lee at what we called in the North the Battle of Antietam. And it gave me a political platform to stand upon and issue the Emancipation Proclamation. The war would go on for 30 months, but I've always said that the first step for freedom for the black man and woman in this country started September 17, 1862, with the victory at Antietam, which McClellan brought about. But that was all McClellan was going to do. He sat in his tent. He did not pursue Lee. I went out and visited with him, told him how important it was for him to go ahead and go. Well, he didn't. That's when I'd had enough. I took him out. I sent him over to Trenton, New Jersey. There hadn't been any military activity there since 1776. I thought So I went through others that were just as bad. Burnside and Hooker, I didn't find a good one until I found George Gordon Meade, and the result at Gettysburg turned out to be the winning battle in my mind of the war. And while I was disappointed with Meade not following Lee, I realized after 3 days that he had won a victory at Gettysburg. He had lifted the morale of Northerners who were so tired of the war they were willing to give up and let Davis have half the country, which would end us. And he had sent a strong idea over to Parliament. Don't you even recognize the Southern government because they're not going to be official. This government is going to be retained. We're not going to divide. So don't establish diplomatic relations with the South. We are going to keep this country together, and I think Meade was my winner finally at Gettysburg.
Did the Bible have an impact on your decisions regarding slavery?
Oh, it did. Did the Bible have an influence? And my father and mother, Baptist in Kentucky, definitely. The Bible, Genesis 1:27, God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. I went ahead a step further and said, nothing put on earth in the image of the divine was ever put here to be imbruted by his fellows. I thought slavery was horrible. I thought that while it was tolerated in the Bible, it was never a racial issue. And this was, I couldn't interpret the Bible being the Word of God as anything other than recognition of humanity. The lady and then the man here.
What memories do you have of your mother?
My mother? She died when I was 9. Nancy Hanks, a lovely lady. There's no photograph of her. Rather frail. She could read a little bit. My dad couldn't read a lick. He taught me a lot about no free lunch. You're going to work. And that was important because I learned responsibility from him, but I also learned how important it is to have education. Without it, you're going nowhere. And my mother grasped a little of that. So she would send me to school whenever I could go. Log cabin school. My dad would never do that. He would keep me at home and work me on the farm. You see, a totally different attitude. And then when my mother died, my father remarried, and my stepmother was almost exactly like her. A woman who even owned 9 books when she came to live with us. I knew we'd get along, yeah. So she promoted my education as well. But I talked about my angel mother. All that I am or all that I ever hope to be, I owe to my angel mother. And when I said that, that mother was in heaven, you see. That's the original mother, the one who had died. This young man.
What was your impression of Ulysses S. Grant?
My feeling about Grant, and you knew Elijah Washburn, an advocate for Grant. Grant up there in Galena, Illinois. Grant was a winner. He was the opposite of McClellan. He hated to retreat as much as McClellan hated to advance. That's just the way they operated. And he went over and he took Paducah, he took Fort Donelson, Fort Henry, Shiloh, Vicksburg. He never lost. So we owe so much to Grant. So I had the highest esteem. And people talked about his pulling at the jug a little bit. I never thought that could be. I thought he had to have a clear mind when he went into battle. He could not have accomplished what he did if he was on the booze. Yeah.
As one who's been overseas and represented an American overseas, I'm curious, is there anything in your history, in your speaking, in your policies that would inform us today as it regards foreign policy?
Are you talking, Mr. Douglas?
Yourself?
Oh. Well, foreign policy was in the hands of Mr. Seward, my capable Secretary of State. We did not want any meddling in our war. Now, we knew that Canada probably had sent 50,000 men here to fight within the Union Army. They had their motives for doing that. They didn't want us divided. France put 35,000 troops in Mexico. He sent Benito Juarez, the legitimate president, out to fight in the hills, guerrilla warfare. We couldn't enforce Mr. Monroe's doctrine because we were fighting ourselves. So we had to count on diplomacy. And England, who had lost us in '76, couldn't get us back in 1812. The South knew that. They were courting the South, they were courting England to come in. My minister, we didn't have ambassadors, my minister to England, John Quincy Adams' son, Charles Francis Adams, alerted us that the British were making some warships for the Confederacy. This was strictly against international regulations. We were a little bit closer to Russia. Russia was eager to sell that big chunk of land off Canada. They had it for sale for 6 cents an acre. And the American people wanted nothing to do with it. They said, we're not going to do that. And I think a later administration got it for about 3 cents an acre. So we were probably closer to Russia than we were to anybody else.
Last question.
Yes.